Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Total Wellness Tuesdays. And I'm so excited to be here because today we are going to discuss a very important topic. So don't forget to invite your friends and family members because we are going to have a discussion around diabetes. And today's topic is diabetes demystified. And I have a very special guest today, which I'm very excited about. So, as you know, Tuesdays, we have this wellness chat to increase your awareness. And for those of you who are seeing me for the first time, I'm Dr. Shobha Rayapudi. I'm both certified lifestyle medicine doctor and also founder of Gift of Health, where we help people struggling with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and other chronic conditions that we see nowadays. So I help people struggling with these chronic conditions to break free from those diseases, reduce their dependence on medications, and have more energy. And it is quite a pleasure today because we are going to talk about a very important topic, diabetes. We have discussed this topic, like if you go to our previous chats, you can definitely find topics around diabetes where we have this discussion with endocrinologists and we have talked about this topic before. But as I said, this is a very important topic. If you think of blood sugar or glucose, it's the very life, or it's the very source of energy for our body, for our cells. And without energy we cannot do anything, right? So when it comes to glucose, and even right now, for those of you who are watching us, your brain cells are utilizing that glucose to actually interpret what you're seeing or what you're hearing from us. So your body uses glucose every nanosecond to actually make make your life. So this is such an important topic. So does that mean if we need glucose, so having more glucose is good for your body? But you also see people, especially people diagnosed with diabetes, so when there is increased blood sugar, that is not a happy situation to be in. Just like you see the plant behind me, it needs water. What happens if I give more water? It's going to die, right? So similarly, when there is more glucose in your blood vessels, your cells are not that happy. So you experience decreased energy levels, you experience cravings, you even see increased aging, and sometimes it's not good for the cells and it increases inflammation. So we are going to talk about it and raise awareness about how we can maintain our blood sugar levels, because it's very important that we maintain our blood sugar levels. And I'm so excited because I have a special guest today. So I have Lucia Tiffany, who is a registered nurse and a health coach. And she, believe it or not, she started actually doing this at the age of 9. So, her parents are also a doctor and nurse duo, and she learned it early. So she has seen people. I mean, she has experienced people reversing from diabetes. At the same time, she has also seen people experiencing diabetes, losing their limbs, losing their eyesight, having problems with kidney. She has 50 years of experience in actually helping people to reverse diabetes. So it's a huge honor and a huge pleasure for me to have her. And we are going to have an exciting conversation. So make sure you invite your friends and family members. And yes, we will be also answering questions. So that's why we do these sessions live, so that you can ask questions and we can answer your questions. So feel free to type in your questions, and I will be definitely asking Lucia those questions. And I am beyond excited. So welcome, Lucia. So I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shobha. It's just really an honor to be here with you and your community today to talk about this very important subject, diabetes, and what to do about it to prevent it and to reverse it. So I'm just really excited about having this time for us to have a dialogue together about it and hopefully bring some real value to our listeners today.
Yes. Yes. So, Lucia, I'll give the floor to you in terms of like diabetes and so first of all, like, what do you think are the cons of like having high blood sugar? So what, like, if it's left untreated, and let's say even when people are diagnosed with diabetes, so like what if I don't take care of it?
Oh, that's a really great question because this is the why. This is why it matters to you that you're here today and that we're talking about this subject. And I think one of the best ways to illustrate it is from my own family. I had two grandparents, my mother's parents, who were both type 2 diabetics, which lets you know that there's probably a really strong genetic tendency in the fact that four out of my eight aunts and uncles and mother all also had diabetes. So we see it, from parents to children. So there's a hereditary factor. That's one of the causes, but it's not the only one. As you talked about, how we deal with that, with what we inherited or not, or what we know runs in our families, how we deal with it, the way the choices we make around it can make a huge difference in the outcomes within our lives. I saw this personally in my own family because I saw my grandmother, who, when she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, asked her doctor, is there something I can do? I don't want to go on medication, because he gave her oral medication. He said, well, you're carrying some extra weight. If you get rid of that, it might help. But nobody was talking about lifestyle and disease reversal back in those days, because this was probably 50 years ago. And she took the doctor seriously. She put herself on a diet, started weighing herself regularly, exercising, being careful about what she ate. She lost all of her extra weight and never didn't need the medication for controlling her blood sugars anymore. And she maintained her ideal weight and lived to the ripe old age of 96 without ever needing medication for blood sugars. So that's one example of an outcome, something that can happen when you find out you are needing medication or you have a diagnosis of prediabetes or diabetes. There are a lot of things you can do to either prevent or reverse it. On the other hand, um, as to consequences, I had an uncle who inherited that gene with the tendency to diabetes, developed diabetes in midlife. And as a minister, he did a lot of social work. Like, he was like visiting families a lot. He wouldn't be home a lot. He'd be traveling a lot. And he chose not to be proactive about how he fed his body, how he moved his body, and developed type 2 diabetes and continued with the same lifestyle. Like, he didn't actually make any big changes. And so he was a very gifted musician. He loved music, loved to play. And some of my favorite memories are playing piano duets, trios, and quartets with him, because he loved ensemble work, which was really unique. Not a lot of people do that. But by the time he was in his late middle age, he was starting to lose his vision. And then he ended up going completely blind, could not read music anymore, which was really tragic. And then he still didn't really like take hold of all the things he could do. And he ended up losing a leg to gangrene, and then he lost another leg, and then he lost his life. And so that's, for me, that's one of the most graphic illustrations of the differences your choices can make in terms of your outcomes. So you can have very different outcomes with exactly the same health challenge.
Yes. Thanks for sharing that, Lucia, because that's what we see in the hospital. Unfortunately, like my husband is a surgeon, and like many people are referred to him for amputation of the leg because they develop gangrene in their foot, and that is the most dreaded complication that we don't want to see. So, but the good news is like as you can see, it is preventable, but let's say even if you have it, that is something that you can take care. I mean, like you could arrest the progression and reverse it as well, which many people find it surprising, because they think, oh, maybe this is genetic, hereditary, so if I get it, like I have to take the pills. And the convention medicine, so what it advises, okay, oh, you have diabetes, so you should not be eating carbs, or so stop taking that. So this is the advice that a lot of people receive. So when people are diagnosed with diabetes, so like what is that they should be doing? So how can they maintain their blood sugar levels, or what are the options that they have?
I love that. That's a great question. And I think that before I can answer that question, we need to clarify maybe a little bit for our audience the different kinds of diabetes, because what
That's
we
great.
do
Yeah.
will vary a little bit depending on what
Yes.
kind. So you may have heard of type 2 diabetes, which is the most common type, especially in developing and developed countries. So, for example, here in the United States, about 85% of diabetics are type 2 diabetics. Used to be called adult onset, but we now have children getting it at the age of 8, 9, and 10. So it's not an adult thing anymore. It can strike anyone whose metabolic system has gotten out of whack, usually through lifestyle choices. But that's type 2. And type 2, unless the pancreas has become completely fatigued, is generally reversible. So the great majority of the type 2 diabetics can reverse their diabetes, especially if it's caught early. For example, prediabetes often comes before type 2 diabetes, and prediabetes is completely reversible. So that there's a lot of hope there. When we look at type 1 diabetes, the other most common kind that people hear about, type 1 diabetes generally means that the pancreas is no longer functioning, like it's just not making adequate amounts of insulin. So when we have that problem, we may not be able to completely reverse it, that is, maintain normal blood sugars with no additional medication. They may still need injectable insulin. But here's the good news. The complications that accompany type 1 diabetes long term can be almost 100% avoided by decreasing the amount of insulin needed. So by increasing insulin sensitivity, you can greatly impact your long-term outcomes, even as a type 1 diabetic. So it doesn't matter whether you have one or two, the things we're going to be talking about today are helpful for both types. Now, there are a few other types. There's type 1.5, also known as LADA, which is actually an autoimmune disorder where the body is attacking the pancreas, especially the beta cells that make insulin. And it's a progressive destruction of the pancreas. So they might start out with the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, but then continue to progress until perhaps the pancreas no longer makes any insulin. So type 1.5 is more of an autoimmune disorder. And the things that we do with our lifestyle to improve the functioning of our immune system, our overall health, is still something very applicable even to people with type 1.5. So we've talked about 1, 1.5, 2. Yes, there is a 3. Diabetes type 3, otherwise known as Alzheimer's. And just like type 2 diabetes, it has the same root cause, which is insulin resistance. And so when we address insulin resistance, we can also be addressing our risk for Alzheimer's. And then there's one that doesn't have a number, and that we call that one gestational diabetes, which is abnormally high blood sugars in women who are pregnant or around pregnancy and the hormonal changes there. Oftentimes that diabetes will go away when the child is born or shortly thereafter, but it is a risk factor for developing type 2 diabetes later in life. So you can see now that there's maybe a few different mechanisms that we're talking about with diabetes. So when we ask the question, what to do if you have diabetes, it is important to know what type of diabetes you have. But since the majority of people are dealing with type 2, and probably type 1 would be the next most common. I don't know, type 1.5 is really increasing as well, especially since COVID and as some other real attacks in our environment and on our bodies. The things that we can do to support overall whole person health will help with all of the different kinds of diabetes. And I would say that primary pillars of interventions that we want to think about and then tailor to each particular person's type of diabetes and their case would be looking at their nutrition, looking at what you put in your body. That's the nutrition, food, drink, everything goes in your mouth. Number 2, we'd be looking at movement, how we use our body. And number 3, looking at stress management, because stress management can have as much of an impact on short-term glucose levels as a meal can. So stress should not be ignored. And then, of course, there are the other areas of lifestyle, like getting enough sunshine, getting enough sleep and rest, and other things like that, that all can help support our body's health. So I hope that gives us a little bit of an introduction and an overview to where we might be going today.
I'm glad you covered this, Lucia, because it's very important that people recognize these different types of diabetes. And as you said, based on the diagnosis of the type of diabetes, so the intervention slightly varies. But as you said, the underlying thing is the insulin resistance that we want to take care of, because a lot of people think, oh, I got diabetes because I'm eating too much sugar, or carbs are causing me diabetes. But seldom they realize it's the insulin resistance that is causing diabetes. So would you like to address about insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity, and how like taking care of that could actually help with our diabetes management?
Sure. I think it's a very important aspect, because if we ignore that aspect, we often fall into other treatment modalities that are only addressing our symptoms, but not really addressing the root cause. And so I think it's very important in health that we determine the root cause of any challenge we're having and then remove that cause. So that's how we have the best outcomes, the best long-term health. So insulin resistance, first of all, to maybe just in a nutshell to explain what it is the fact that our body normally, as we eat food, it converts the food to energy, which fuels our body. So it's a really important process, obviously. And if we don't eat, we starve to death. And we starve to death because we have no more fuel for the body. So it's really important to eat. And then what our body does with our food next is very important, because it breaks down the foods we eat. It breaks down all the carbohydrates into simple sugars. And it also has the ability to break down protein, maybe stored in our muscles, break down fat stored in other places, and turn it into simple sugars. But it's a more complicated process, and our body prefers to use carbohydrates and burn them for sugar. That is simply the way our bodies were designed to work best. So our brain, as Dr. Shobha mentioned earlier, relies on steady levels of glucose, that's a simple sugar, for good cognition, for problem solving, for thinking, for learning, all of those things that we do with our brains without even paying attention to it. So our bodies take the carbohydrates we eat, break it down into simple sugars. It's carried into the blood, and from the blood needs to go into all of the cells of our body as fuel to keep us going at the cellular level. The metabolic process, the way we were designed to work, is that as the sugar levels in the blood go up, because they've come maybe from the stomach and the upper intestines after a meal, levels go up in the blood, but the blood isn't where the glucose is needed. It needs to be delivered to the cells so that it can be burned for fuel. That delivery mechanism involves insulin, which is made from our pancreas. The pancreas has sensors. When it sees blood sugars going up, it shoots insulin out into the bloodstream to accompany the glucose. When it comes to the cells near each of the capillaries, the smallest blood vessels that feed the tissues of our body, there are special receptors on the cell wall, which must be activated for glucose to get an entrance, to be able to cross the cell wall and get in. These receptors are like doorways, and these doorways have a lock. The lock can only be opened with a key, and insulin is the key. So when insulin and blood sugars in the bloodstream rise, the insulin is right there to unlock the door, allows the door to open, glucose leaves the blood and enters the cell. That's where it can be best used. That's normal metabolism. Insulin resistance means that for one reason or another, the doors on the cell are not opening every time insulin shows up with its key. It's almost like somebody stuck a little bit of gum in the lock. And so the key goes in, but it's sticky and it doesn't always unlock the door. It'll unlock it maybe starting 95% of the time. As insulin resistance goes up, it may only open the door 90%, 85%, 80%, 50%. It can get to where it's hardly ever opening the door. And so that condition is what we call insulin resistance. The cell is being resistant to the work of insulin, which is that key in the lock. And when the key in the lock doesn't work and the door doesn't open, glucose continues to circulate at high levels in the blood instead of leaving the blood and going where it belongs. So that's the mechanism we're talking about. So as we think about how to address that, then we want to ask the question, how do we unstick the locks if we've developed insulin resistance? How do we get the gum out of the lock, right? And one of the mechanisms that pushes the stickiness of those insulin locks is the presence of fat. And it's fat in two main forms: the fat that we eat and the fat that we carry on our body. Both kinds of fat raise our insulin resistance, make those locks a little stickier. And both of those are things that we can address through our choices. Weight loss is obviously one of the ways to decrease the weight we're carrying on our bodies. By itself, that will help the insulin resistance to drop. But I think by far that the fat in our food is probably the most powerful and most controllable, quickly controllable aspects, because we actually have complete control over what goes in our mouth. Because we choose what we put on our fork, we choose what we put on our spoon. And so we can make choices that address the fat that's coming in. And what we've actually found through studies of metabolism and insulin resistance is that if we drop the proportion of our calories that come from fat, whether it's healthy fats or not, but of course, we're going to talk about the importance of using healthy fats. But as we drop the proportion of fat calories in our overall diet, we get increased insulin sensitivity, which is exactly what we're looking for. The resistance drops, the sensitivity goes up. It's like we're pulling the gum out of the lock. And so one of the biggest things we need to start looking at to improve our metabolism around insulin is to lower our intake of fat. In fact, if the proportion of our fat calories is between 15, well, actually right around 15%, you don't want to drop lower, but right around 15% of the calories coming from fat in the form of whole foods, we find that that maximizes insulin sensitivity. obviously in combination with other lifestyle things like sleep and stress management and exercise. But from a dietary point of view, that provides maximum insulin sensitivity based on our intake. And that's often where people are challenged, is like, how do we do that?
Excellent. That was such a beautiful explanation. Thanks for doing that, Lucia. So, like as you mentioned, the fat that we are eating, and also the fat that we are carrying inside, it's the fat inside the cells, like which is causing the lipotoxicity and increasing the insulin resistance. So some of the people go like, okay, I'm not that overweight. So why am I experiencing diabetes? So like a lot of people have that concern. Okay, I can see that. Okay, so if you're overweight or if you're consuming a lot of fat, maybe that is causing to insulin resistance. But like what if I'm I mean carrying normal BMI and I'm not that overweight? So why is that like I'm seeing diabetes, or why is that I'm diagnosed with diabetes?
Great question. Although the majority of type 2 diabetics are also dealing with carrying excess weight, there is a certain percentage that are not. And so there's a few different reasons for that. One of that can be that they are actually skinny fat, which means their body is thin, slender, normal, but they have a high proportion of body fat. So in terms of body composition, they have a lot of fat and not as much muscle as they need. And so that can be one reason. Another reason can be that they are chronically running a high stress life. Because you see, when we are stressed on a chronic, ongoing basis, many of our hormones are being secreted at much higher than normal levels. And those stress hormones, like epinephrine, also called adrenaline, noradrenaline, they also affect the pancreas and increase the levels of insulin that are circulating. And so you end up with both high insulin and high stress hormone levels, and that will also push the whole insulin resistance package. So there are other ways that you can be becoming insulin resistant without being overweight. That's a great question.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. Because, like, yeah, like our viewers had that question. So I thought I'd yeah, ask you. So so other thing is so one thing like you have mentioned like how food affects our blood glucose. So what about exercise? So how can exercise help in terms of managing our blood spikes, or even like controlling our glucose? Would you be able to speak to that?
Sure. And that's another very important intervention that we want to optimize when we're looking to either prevent or reverse diabetes. And that is that our body has several storage depots for sugar. So when we consume carbohydrates, as we said, our body likes to burn carbohydrates before it burns things like fat and protein. And so if we consume more carbohydrates than our body actually needs for the day, it's going to store it. And it often stores it in a form called glucagon. It can store it in the liver. If that process is overloaded, overburdened, you can end up with fatty liver. And it can be from too many simple sugars in the diet, and they don't have to come from alcohol. But that's one of the places where your body will store excess carbohydrates in the liver. Another one is in the muscle. And so our muscles contain storage depots for glucagon, which your body then uses when you exercise. Because when you move around, your muscles start saying, I need more energy, more fuel. Well, here it is. It's all there handy for the muscles to call on to energize them so you can walk, run, jog, whatever you're doing. And so it's actually like you can think about the storage area in your muscle is kind of like a pantry where your body can store extra sugar. As you exercise, the pantry is emptied. And guess what? that means that it's available for the next meal or the next day when you have some extra carbs coming in that you don't need to burn right away. There's empty shelves in the pantry of your muscles where it can go. And so it can leave the blood and your blood sugar levels go down and be stored in the muscle. By the same token, we often talk about how important it is to check your blood sugars first thing in the morning. And it's important that you do that before your morning walk, for example, because as you exercise, the process of exercising, like we said, calls sugar out of the muscles and that calls it into the bloodstream. So you will temporarily see blood sugars actually going up while you're exercising, but that's simply your body's way of making sure all your muscles are getting the fuel they need. That's not a bad thing. The overall effect is that it helps to unload the extra carbohydrates, and as that load is depleted, the body has an opportunity to turn fat into glucose if it still needs more energy. And it can help to unload those other cells in the body that are storing too much fat and need to let go of some of it. Once that pantry is empty, it can start to pull from some of those areas. And so it can help to slenderize our body cells so that they're not so fat and sassy. Sassy being they saying, goodbye, insulin, I have all the energy I need, go away. So it has some long-term effects, especially as we continue to exercise. Now, that's one way that it helps our body is by emptying the pantry so we have places for short-term glucagon storage. But it also explains why when you exercise, if you're like wearing a continuous glucose monitor, it's likely that you're going to see some rises in your blood sugar as you're exercising. That's perfectly normal. What is really interesting, though, is that our normal blood sugars like start out kind of level in the morning, should go up with our meal, should drop down before the next meal, go back up as we eat, and so on. So blood sugars are supposed to vary throughout the day. What is important in terms of like some of your markers for metabolism, like your A1C, which is looking at your average blood sugar levels, is greatly affected by how high your sugar spikes after a meal. So one of the fastest ways to actually drop your A1C and improve your inflammation levels in your body, because high spikes go along with high inflammation. One of the easiest, fastest ways to do that is to get up from the table as soon as you've finished a meal, like immediately, and start walking. Doesn't need to be aerobic walking or power walking or anything strenuous, but you need to move your large muscles, your leg muscles and your arm muscles, like swing your arms as you walk. If you do those things for 30 minutes after a meal, what we find is it can make the top of your sugar spike considerably lower. Like instead of spiking maybe to 180 after a meal, it might only spike to 140 or 50. We actually, on average, and this is very much an average, you'll want to like maybe wear a glucose monitor for at least a little while to see how your body's reacting and see exactly what's going on with your body. But we find on average, for every minute of exercise after a meal, you will drop your blood sugar by about 2 points. So 30 minutes of exercise on average can drop your blood sugar about 60 points. And I've seen people drop as much as 75 or 80 points with 20 to 30 minutes of exercise after a meal. So that's just walking. It doesn't have to be anything big, and it can be walking around the coffee table in the living room, or it can be more fun by going outside and walking in the sunshine, enjoying the fresh air and the bird songs. So it's the movement that actually makes a difference there, and that's all about timing. If you even wait 10 minutes after you finish your meal before you start moving those big muscle groups, you will not blunt the spike as effectively as if you do it immediately after your last mouthful of food. I often tell people if they want to go outside and do their walking after meal, put the tennis shoes next to their chair at the table so that they're there ready to go, remind them to get up. And that is complete opposite of what I would say 95% of Americans do, which is get up and go sit in an easy chair in front of the TV after they eat. Right? So just that timing of the movement is one of the most effective ways you can blunt your after meal spike and drop your A1C numbers in as little as 3 or 4 days.
That's an excellent tip, Lucia, because actually a lot of people have questions about that. So, what is the best time to exercise? So, let's say, like, usually when we get up in the morning, we exercise like as a routine. Um, so one question is, so is it better to exercise after meal? Like if my routine is to exercise in the morning, so should I change that to just after meal?
That's a great question, too. If you actually need to be bringing your numbers down quickly, I would prioritize the after meal exercise. As soon as you have that in place, I would add other exercise. Like that's not enough exercise all by itself to provide all the benefits of exercise for your insulin resistance. So that will have a very quick impact on overall inflammation levels, overall average blood sugar levels. Longer aerobic exercise or short sprints of high intensity intermittent training are both super effective for longer term impact on your insulin resistance. And so the timing for that kind of exercise is actually optimal before breakfast. So before the first meal of the day. And we'll often recommend like an hour of brisk walking or bicycling or 20 minutes of high intensity interval training as that pre-breakfast exercise that really empties the muscle pantry, gets you prepared for the day. So you can see that the exercise at different times kind of serves different purposes. And so we need both kinds. We need the after meal for the immediate blood sugar impact. We need the before breakfast for emptying our muscle pantries, preparing us for the day metabolically. And we also need strength building exercise to increase our overall muscle mass. So those, we need all three kinds incorporated, but I usually prioritize them. If people aren't ready to do everything, start with your after meal, add your before breakfast, and then add your strength training. But all of them serve different purposes and help us with insulin resistance, just different mechanisms.
That is such an excellent tip, because yes, like people are like, okay, what is the good time to exercise? So and this serves all the purposes that you just mentioned. So what about sleep? Does sleep affect your glucose levels?
I love that. I want us to understand first the impact that stress hormones have on our body, because like I have known people to, without eating, go from having a perfectly normal blood sugar to 400. And the only thing that happened was they got a stressful call from their boss. So all by itself, stress can raise your blood sugars to very high levels. And some people obviously react more strongly to stress than others, but you need to understand that. So when we are dealing with that aspect of stress, one of the best antidotes is being well rested. We actually do a lot to lower our chronic stress levels by high quality, regular sleep and in adequate amounts. So sleep is a really important piece of the package that we want to implement to optimize our body's ability to use carbohydrates properly. You know, as you mentioned earlier, one of the first things many people hear when they get a diagnosis of prediabetes or diabetes is, oh, you got to cut the carbs out. But actually, we need the carbs for energy. So what we need to do is improve the way we use the carbs in our body. And that's why we're talking about insulin resistance today. Because when insulin resistance drops down, we can eat the same carb load that before might have been spiking our sugars into the 200 or 300s. We can handle the same carb load with a very sensitive, with sensitivity to insulin without having the same spike. So the height of the spike is kind of a secondary marker to how insulin resistant we are.
Excellent. So in terms of like as you spoke, like, okay, food affects your blood glucose, stress affects your blood glucose, and exercise can help you to reduce the spike, and sleep affects blood sugar. So like as you're able to see, like all these factors are affecting the blood glucose. I actually wanted you to talk about, so like there is so much to know about diabetes or be aware of diabetes, and you hold different summit master classes about diabetes. So would you like to let our audience know, like you have an upcoming master class which is free, which I think our audience could take advantage of that. So would you like to speak about the master class and what is happening there?
Sure. So on the first Tuesday of this next month, this is May, it'll be May 7th,
Yes.
May 1st, May 7th.
Yes, yeah, it's May 7th. Yes.
On May 7th, I'm not sitting here looking at my calendar. It's like I really should have this in my head. On May 7th, we'll be doing a master class on steps to reversing diabetes. And we're going to be looking at some of the most effective ways that we can apply some of the interventions we've talked about today. Like we talk about sleep, or we talk about nutrition or exercise. How can we actually like implement it in our body? What in our day, in our routine, in our schedule? What does that look like? What are some like specific things we can do that we can eat for our best insulin sensitivity? What are specific ways in which we can improve the quality of our sleep so that we're really getting all the benefits we can from our sleep? What are ways that we can effectively manage our stress? You know, nowadays we are living in a society where everybody is experiencing a lot of stress, and we really must pay attention to how we're dealing with that and make sure that we're coping in ways that actually support our bodies and our health rather than tear it down. So in this masterclass, we're going to have a panel with I think this one's got 8 or 10 experts, and they're all going to be sharing in their level of expertise, in their area of expertise, what you can do to prevent and to reverse diabetes. So you won't really want to miss that. And I think that Dr. Shobha is going to put the link to that right under the
Yes.
video, so that that's an easy way
Yes.
for you to access that.
We are putting the link right here in the comments so that you can grab the link to that masterclass. And this is a free masterclass, so don't lose this opportunity. And spots are limited for this, so that's why make sure you sign up like after you see the link here. And we are so excited. And as Lucia mentioned, so she is having like did you say 8 to 9 experts, Lucia,
Yeah,
that you're having?
I think I have 10 this time.
Okay, so
Yeah.
10 experts, like where they're talking about like how you can take care of your diabetes, which is very important.
And it's
So
live.
uh-huh.
It's free, it's live, so you can ask questions. You can be dropping questions in the chat and get your experts to answer questions. So it's interactive. It's a pretty intensive masterclass. It's going to run for 4 hours. So yeah, you want to get signed up and not miss out.
Yes, and you'll be getting so much out of it. So, Lucia, like, would you be able to speak in terms of, okay, so once a person is diagnosed with diabetes, so what are the foods that can help with increasing the insulin sensitivity? So, what should be eating? Because as you see, a lot of people are afraid to eat carbs, so they think that that is the thing that they should be avoiding. So, would you be able to speak to that?
Sure. So I would start by adding vegetables to your plate. That would be one of the best things that you can do, because vegetables are very nutrient dense. They have a lot of minerals and vitamins, and many of us are starving for nutrients. We might have all the calories and more that we need, but not getting all the nutrients. Nutrients are things like minerals, vitamins, phytochemicals with their antioxidants, fiber, water. All of those are nutrients. It's not just carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that our body needs for health and to keep itself well. So it's really important for us to start adding those things to our plate. And so I suggest that people add those things at the beginning of the meal. So like add greens, whether they're cooked, whether they're raw. It can be a salad, it can be cooked, cabbage, green leafy vegetables like kale, Swiss chard, mustard, different color cabbages, different color kale, broccoli, cauliflower. All of the vegetables are very nutrient dense. They're full of phytochemicals that help us fight cancer, help lower our insulin resistance, our overall inflammatory levels in our body. They're just one of the best things we can do. And most people are not eating nearly enough vegetables. So that's one of the first things that you can do. And vegetables, because they're very full of fiber, also help us to feel full before we eat too many calories. So having it at the beginning of the meal can be helpful in several different ways. Secondly, is that most of us also need to improve and add to the number of and types and varieties of legumes that we're putting in our diet. So the legumes are all of your peas and beans, chickpeas, pinto beans, black beans, mung beans, garbanzos, navy beans, great northerns, split peas, lentils of all kinds. And they're very versatile foods, but they're very rich in the nutrients that our bodies need for healing and to support our best health. So often the core of a really powerful inflammation lowering, diabetes reversing diet are beans and greens. And so that's a great place to put a focus on your plate. As you do that, you may find that some other things start to fall off your plate or become smaller quantities. That's okay. The other things that are often falling off are the things that are lower in fiber. Things like animal products, which actually have no fiber, whether we're talking dairy, milk, eggs, cheese, whether we're talking meat and fish, whether that's red meat, white meats, fish. None of those food items contain any fiber. And as Americans, we are very, very deprived and deficient of fiber in our diet. So really increasing the fiber is one of the most powerful things we can do to help ourselves in every way. So as you increase the fiber rich foods on your plate, some of the less fiber, fiber poor foods may fall off the edge, and that's okay. So, but I want you to think about adding things to your plate more than taking things away. And if you start with these things that really, really help support your health, you're going to be in a good spot. Now, we can't ignore carbohydrates when we're talking about that with diabetics, because yes, you can eat carbs, but it really matters what the form is and what kind of carbs. Carbs are not created equal. So just because there's a number on a label does not tell you whether or not it's an appropriate carb. Because you can have the carbs in a whole apple in this hand and the same number of carbs over here with say French fries, but the way those carbs are going to operate in your body are completely different. The way it's going to affect your blood sugars, short-term and long-term, is completely different. So you got to do more than count carbs. You actually need to pay attention to the kinds of carbs. So what I often tell diabetics is that until they become insulin sensitive, they need to use grains in limited quantities and only intact whole grain form. So that means you don't usually tolerate grains that have been broken down, processed in any way, and or refined. By processing, I mean grinding, rolling, cutting, splitting. All of those things that break down the grain accelerate the rate at which your body absorbs the carbohydrates from them. And so the more whole the grain is, the longer time it takes to hit your bloodstream, which allows you to level your blood sugars much more than when you're eating refined and processed carbohydrates. So an example of refined and processed carbohydrates are things like white flour pasta, white flour breads, baked goods that are made with mostly white flour. Even goods that are made with 100% whole grain flour are not usually well tolerated by diabetics. Even things like brown rice is often a difficult one for most diabetics to handle well. So those we want to kind of eliminate as much as possible those refined grains that have been ground up, rolled out, split. And instead, we want to consume our grains whole and intact. That means eating things like wheat berries, oat berries, also known as oat groats, millet, amaranth, quinoa. Those are all examples of grains that we normally eat in the intact form. That's the way in which we'll tolerate it the best, as long as we don't overdo our quantities on that. You can have it every day, but usually just in small quantities. And you need to monitor your own blood sugars so you know where your body is with the insulin sensitivity. Once you are very insulin sensitivity, I know very active men, for example, that are consuming 600 grams of carbs a day, and they're type 1 diabetics, and they only use physiological amounts of insulin to support them, which means the amount of insulin a normal pancreas would be putting out on a normal day. So that's something under 20 units for most people. So you can see that for a type 1 diabetic, that's super low insulin. Most type 1 diabetics are shooting up 40, 60, 100 or more units of insulin a day. So insulin sensitivity is huge with the amount of carbs you can tolerate. So that's why I say start with small amounts of the right kinds of carbs. Fat, we want to be getting our fat from the most nutrient dense sources, and those are whole foods. So things like avocados and olives and nuts and seeds that are not roasted with added oil and salt. Those are all great sources of healthy fats for us. And protein we can get if everything on our plate is a whole, unrefined, unprocessed food from the plant kingdom. You will have enough protein. You never have to worry about having enough protein. So as long as you're just getting a variety of fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables, you're going to be doing well. And diabetics may have to, until they're insulin sensitive, be careful about the quantity of fruit that you're eating. And you want to eat both your fruit and your grains in your first meal of the day, because that's when your body will handle the carbohydrates the best. The later in the day you consume your grains, the more of a spike you're going to see for the exact same grain, exact same quantity. So they're best used in your first meal of the day. So I hope that's helpful.
You hit so many important points, Lucia. Thank you so much, because it's important, as you said, like keeping the grains intact, and even like having that grain and fruit in the first meal, rather than having at the later time point, because people wonder, okay, I'm eating the same things, but when you eat the same things in the evening, like why is it different? So and you said it so beautifully, like our audience loves it. So Sridhar, he has a question here. Is it good to take medications just before you exercise, or what would be a good timing to take them if you are on medications for diabetes?
Okay, so we're talking about sugar, like
Yes.
either oral medications or insulin for sugar. Okay,
Yes.
you have to treat exercise like a medicine, which means just like you probably have a schedule for your medicines, you need to exercise on a schedule to optimize it, which means that when you're doing it on a schedule, you are going to learn, like, if I do my exercise before breakfast, what sugar levels do I need to have so I don't either bottom out or go too high. And then with my meal, then if I'm exercising right after the meal, I might not need as much insulin to cover that meal as I would if I didn't. And so it's very important that you monitor your blood sugars closely as you make any of the changes we talked about today, because I have seen blood sugars normalize in days. And if you're on medications for blood sugar, and you implement some of these things, you can be at risk for too low blood sugar, which can be life threatening. And it's very important that you be working with your primary care provider to adjust your dosages. I know, for example, that in many programs that implement the things we talked about today, whole food, plant-based diet, exercise, adequate, like 10,000 steps a day, plus the after meal exercise. I know programs that start their people on that. The first day, they take them off all injectable insulin, for sure, all their long-term injectable insulin. They may only keep them on short term to cover a meal at a time based on what their blood sugars are. And they'll usually take them off of all their oral medications right at the beginning because it's safer to run slightly higher blood sugars for a week or two than it is to risk going too low. So do be aware of that. And I know that I have had people in my classes that were not in a live-in, they weren't in an intensive class, they were just on their own implementing the things that I shared. And without me even sharing everything you've heard today, they were off all their oral medications in 3 days. So I'm really serious about how fast this can work. And it's important that if you're on medications, that you be doing them on a schedule that takes into account your exercise times and intensity and all of that. And it needs to be kept pretty much the same, especially if you're a type 1 diabetic, because your exercise is going to be really important, but it needs to be the same amount, basically about the same time every day, and make sure that you are modulating your injectable insulin to not go too high or go too low anytime in the day, including your scheduled exercise. So I hope that answers the question. It may be not what we were looking for because the answer isn't before or after. The answer is it has to be part of your overall monitoring and management of your blood sugars.
You answered that question. You actually answered for, because yes, like people had question about exercise. So and that's an excellent tip. Like keeping a schedule for the exercise, which is very important. And yes, Lucia, like as you said, you see the changes so fast. So when it comes to dropping the blood sugar level, so even in our programs, like our students notice that, like when they go on this plant-based diet and when they keep their grains intact and when they're eating these foods, it is really heartwarming to see like how their blood sugar numbers drop, and a lot of our students, they were able to be off of insulin oral meds by changing their diet and lifestyle. And so as you said, this is so powerful, and you can see the changes in 3 days. Yes, I mean, like it's so powerful that you see the changes immediately as well. Yes. So it was a pleasure, Lucia, and I'm so glad, and our community is also so happy to have you, and you got wonderful comments, great topic, and like thank you, and they're so happy that you could carve some time for us today and share this very important topic, and we are so blessed that you were able to join us. So thank you so much for this wonderful topic. And as Lucia mentioned, so we have this wonderful masterclass on May 7th, and the link is here in the chat, folks. So make sure you sign up for this very interesting masterclass where you're going to learn more, get more tips and wonderful nuggets about like what you can do for your diabetes. Because remember, diabetes is something that is reversible. We don't want you to manage, we want you to eradicate. So why medicate when you can eradicate this preventable disease, right? So
True.
this is a very important, like this is very important to know, because unfortunately not many people know about this. So feel free to share this with your friends and family members who are experiencing pre-diabetes or diabetes, because as you can see, this information is life-saving. So feel free to share with your friends and family members about this important topic, and also like you can share this link with your friends so that they can join. So this masterclass is available for everyone. So even if you don't have diabetes, this is a great topic for you to know, like how you can prevent from happening to you, and even if you have it, like how you can reverse it. Yes, Lucia, do you?
I was wondering if I could share one more free resource for people who
Sure,
are listening,
sure.
because there's only so much you can cover, right, in an hour or
Yeah.
even in a master
Yeah.
class. And that is that I do have some series on my YouTube channel that they
Mhm.
can access. Like I have one on pre-diabetes treatment, and a lot of people are in that pre-diabetes place where they're not really full diabetics, but they want to know more about pre-diabetes and how do I keep this from turning into full-blown diabetes. And so if you just go to my YouTube channel, it's called Undoing Diabetes God's Way, and
Okay.
you will find there's some playlists there, and there's a playlist for that series that might be something useful for some of you here. So
Yes, definitely. We are going to post that link. So we are going to post
okay.
your YouTube chat. So you said it's Undo Diabetes?
Undoing Diabetes God's Way.
Okay, got it. Okay, so we will be sure to post that link here for our viewers. So is there any others social media handles which you would like people to go there and get your wonderful nuggets about
Sure.
diabetes? Yes.
Sure. Another one is my Instagram, which is Lucia Tiffany RN. So that's an easy one, Lucia Tiffany RN. And if you're interested in recipes, you might want to check out my website, theharvestcook.com. It's all about food. And
Yes.
there's some really good articles about plant-based eating, how to make a transition. You'll also find some resources, recipes, those sorts of things. So that's another great free resource for you,
Definitely.
theharvestcook.com.
So, what are the programs that you offer, Lucia? So, feel free to let our audience know so that if anybody is interested, can sign up for your programs.
Sure. What I like to do is I actually like to jump on the phone with people that know they need to do something for their health. And then we talk about their challenges. We look at what's the best fit thing for them. So like maybe the best thing for them is accountability and support for a year to actually like put into effect all of these interventions that we're talking about, not only get the results, but build the habits to make them sustainable for a lifetime. Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to do that. So that's probably one of the ways that's easiest. And they can just email me for that at luciatiffany.com. So you have questions that didn't get answered today. You think you'd like to jump on a phone call with me and let's see what are some of the best ways that we can serve you. Lucia@luciatiffany.com will do it.
Okay, so we are placing your email in the chat so that people have it.
Oh, thank you.
So, yes.
I
So,
want to say it's
excellent.
been a real privilege to be here with every one of you. This has been really fun, and
Yes.
I've enjoyed it very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Lucia. So it was a great pleasure to have you. And sure, like we will be talking more about it. And I would like to invite you more because, as you can see, there are so many things to talk about. There are so many. Topics just around this disease, right? So, like, we will be having more chats about this as well. And thank you for your wonderful talk today. Thank you for this information.
Oh, I
And
thought thank you for the work you're doing, Dr. Shobha. It's so important. And people that are in your community are so fortunate to have somebody that cares about them the way you do and educates them. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
thank you so much. So, and our audience is really happy. So, thank you so much.